Hello, everybody. I have a really great guest today. Her name's Jamie Koff. She is the founder and president of a company named Fabric to Finish. And what she literally does is helps designers take their dream from that sketch on the paper. Sometimes it doesn't even start with a sketch. It starts with an idea in their head. And she takes that design from inception straight through to choosing the fabrics, materials, hardware, manufacturers, and getting it to the finish where it can go down a runway or be on a website or be hanging in a store or someplace else. And she's got a great history that brought her to this level of expertise. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to talk about how she works today for many designers and wannabe designers and existing designers. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Stay tuned. Welcome, Jamie Koff.
Hi.
Fabric to Finish. So I know at some point you had an idea that this was a good idea for a business, but it started with a lot of experience prior. You worked for some really big names to get your experience as I believe it was a production line manager?
Production coordinator.
Production coordinator. So let's talk about what's a production coordinator and who you worked for to start to develop your core skill sets.
Well, I'd be happy to share. Well, first and foremost, production coordinator has many different definitions, but it's a very in my experience, a very entry-level position. Mm-hmm. Mine in particular was at J.Crew back in the early 90s when it was still family-owned, well before Mickey Drexler came in and sprinkled his magic fairy dust. But at that time, I was strictly an assistant to two production managers where I learned a lot of the underbelly of the business. It was very administrative, dealing with overseas offices. Back in the day, J.Crew had a Singapore office. We had buying offices in several other countries. And so it was very much facilitating a lot of the day-to-day purchase order issuing and delivery tracking. And my claim to fame is being in charge of the morning fax machine, which was a full-time job at the time because this was pre-internet and it was just when you had a direct electronic email line to your overseas offices just for email letters, not attachments. So everything was very much fax-based.
Right.
So you can imagine the influx of faxes that came in the morning from an overnight.
And the pages flying all over and trying to put the pages back together.
And paper not being in the machine.
Oh, yeah.
And, as I always say to my staff and my students that I mentor, what is the CC and the BCC meaning came from an old-fashioned fax machine, which is a prehistoric dinosaur in their book. So it was very administrative. It was foundational. And, I got in at 7:30 in the morning and I left at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And if that's any indication of how much I put into that's simple.
Now, I'm curious, was a production line coordinator, was this something that was your first job, your first entree into the world of fashion and design?
Yeah, actually, J.Crew was my first job. A little backstory, I was not permitted to go to fashion school. My parents were both professionals and said, you will never be able to support yourself in the fashion industry. So we would like for you to have a proper liberal arts education. And in hindsight, I absolutely am grateful that they imposed that ban on me because it really well-rounded myself as an individual and as, somebody who was growing and maturing into their own existence through college and understanding, how to be. But really, I found my passion and started interviewing for sending faxes and cover letters back to the fax machine out to hundreds
and going through
and
those
hundreds.
Huge New York Times pages.
Well, frankly, I didn't know anybody in the fashion industry, and I didn't know how good of a networker I was. But I think back, I networked with, a second cousin's second cousin on the other side because they just knew somebody that was in fashion. So, okay, you meet, and this individual referred me to a publication called Women's Wear Daily. And I didn't know about it as a senior at GW. And I looked it up. I found that they sold it at a newsstand in DuPont Circle. So I took the Metro and I went to DuPont Circle, but I was sure to go on a Wednesday because I was told on Wednesday they had the classified section, right? I mean, I'm dating myself.
I remember.
And so I went and bought my copy, got back on the Metro and started, sending random cover letters to these random fax numbers that in some cases had no information. They didn't say, Ralph Lauren is hiring. In some cases, they had the big ad with the logo and you wanted to apply to a recognizable brand. But, there were brands in there that I didn't know about, but I was just for practice purposes sending cover letters and faxes. And as the story goes, I was interning at a law firm my senior year. They offered me a full-time job to stay as an associate, which was never my goal in life. And I set up interviews in New York at, the Macy's buying program, the Bloomingdale's buying program, thinking, how do I get into the industry, not having a technical background, not being a designer or a merchant or a sales expert, but how to get in somehow, get my foot in. And so I set up interviews to come up from DC, take the 5:00 in the morning train because I didn't know anybody, spent the whole day interviewing. And nothing came out of that first day. I set up a second round. And as the story goes, when I went back to my apartment from the law firm job, because I left my luggage, my overnight bag in my apartment. I wound up networking and found a friend of a friend of a friend who knew somebody so that I didn't have to take that god-awful 5 a.m. train. So when I came back to my apartment, I saw the light blinking on my answering machine. And, back in the day, you couldn't, I couldn't even call in to retrieve my messages. And I pressed play and it turned out to be somebody from J.Crew saying that they got my resume and they hope it wasn't too late and that they missed me because they saw in my cover letter, I'll be up on Friday such and such, whatever. It was Memorial Day weekend. It was that Friday. I remember it. And so I immediately called and said, I'm absolutely able to see you tomorrow at the end of the day. I squeezed them in. And they were my last appointment, and I wound up getting the job offer. And so in the men's knits durables department, so I packed up my apartment in DC in 2 weeks, found an apartment in New York, moved up and started working at J.Crew and never looked back.
How long were you at J.Crew before you were recruited to another big name?
Well, I was there for a year and, full admission, I wasn't recruited. I was terminated. And, as the story goes, so were my predecessors and the people that came well after me. There were, it was tough to keep people in that role. And, times were fast flowing and, inexperienced managers. And it's all good. I learned a tremendous amount from that experience. But I networked my way into the Tommy Hilfiger Human Resources Department, which then kind of parlayed me into my next job opportunity, which was a fabric assistant at Tommy Hilfiger Menswear.
Fabric assistant. What's a fabric assistant?
Well, that's a good question because they kind of created the opportunity for me. Basically, it's product development and production function, but strictly focusing on fabric. So the fabric.
So are you designing the fabric or creating the fabric or sourcing it?
Sourcing and managing the process of its inception through to completion. So the design team were very much involved in all of the adoption, pitching all the ideas to Tommy, putting their rig boards together, their creative presentations, whatever the theme was of that season, prep tech or, whatever, military, Americana, whatever those themes were, then they would select their fabrics based on the opportunities within whatever price points and fabric minimums and sourcing requirements that the production team dictated. So we worked very hand in hand with the production team. In fact, we were under the head of production who oversaw the efforts, excuse me. But primarily, what I find really unique about that experience is that it was its own massive function within a corporate structure. And from what I understand throughout my journey, fabric was a big deal, but it was never an entire entity. You know, I think a lot of companies not undervalued or undermined the importance of fabric as a function, but we in the Tommy world were very much very linear as it related to that function. For example, in some cases, factories would want to price out a chino pant or a dress shirt or a zip-up jacket or a performance puffer and just say, here's our package, use our fabric. In the world of vertically, integrated functionality, it was really important for Tommy's team and the whole methodology of the company to have full transparency and to have supply chain access. So my entire background and history was building and maintaining and creating these relationships with all of these vendors as a function, visiting the fabric mills in Taiwan to hand off the yarn dye plaid programs. So once the line was designed and tech packs were issued, I had, 20, 22, 25 plaids that we would then decide how to allocate which mills got those plaids and what was the poplin construction and what was the price point from last season and how to keep feeding and nurturing these relationships while they were manufacturing a product that was, a significant amount of quantity. So what does a fabric assistant do was working day to day with all of the offices with our counterparts. And a lot of those offices were the on the ground team. So be it our Seoul office, our Taipei office, our Hong Kong office, or our India or, Israel, Turkey office, we were the intermediaries of the process, and the overseas teams were the ones that every day color approvals, lab dip resubmissions, because every part of fashion is a time in action calendar, right? So in order to get it to Runway or to get it to Bloomies or Macy's or Nordstrom's, it has to start somewhere. And so everybody has a calendar that they have to follow. So colors have to be approved by a certain date. Fabrics have to be adopted by a certain date. Fabric testing reports have to be submitted. First proto meeting has to happen by such and such time. I mean, I think back, a lot of the functionality between my first overseas trips was to prepare the rest of the team for what they had to do on the trip. For example, if someone, if there was 32 fabrics for the season. I'm exaggerating. I lost count how much we developed, but it was my job to, we had allocated the chambray vendor, the yarn dye poplin, the 8-wale or 14-wale corduroy, the 2-ply canvas, whatever it was. I had to get fabric ready in piles lined up around the conference room to hand over to the production team who would come the week after me, so that they could hand over a tech pack and the fabrics and the trims to the garment factory and say, here, make me a first proto. So that
don't think of all those stages.
So that time could be saved, right? So most companies just show up and say, hi, here's my program. We would show up and prepare. And so I would run, if the mill didn't have the right construction, what was more important for the proto meeting was really the visuals of it. So if it was a neon green check, right? So what's the closest thing? So I would go to the local market in Sham Shui Po in Hong Kong, and those hot, sweaty, dirty, nasty days in Hong Kong, dusty, and, the smell. I mean, I can smell it now. For those listening, you know what I'm talking about if you've been there. But I would literally pick out, 5 to 10 yards. Oh, that's good. Tommy will see that. He'll understand it. And even if it was not in the right construction, he got a visual of the first protos that were coming through for everybody to sign off on costing, design, and development. And by the time the proto meeting took place using those substitute fabrics and prints, we at least had strike-offs and hand looms to show him. So, because hand looms only come in a little a swatch card size, and you get to see a triangle of a plaid.
Right.
So at
That's
least he
pretty
could
difficult,
and yarn skeins, because mills don't have things in stock that are exactly what you're looking for when you are customizing. So, yeah. The cycle is, it was a pretty big cycle. And for, an assistant in the fabric department, it was pretty comprehensive.
And what was the next thing you learned after fabric department?
Well, interestingly enough, at the fabric team at Tommy, I was promoted and selected for a pretty significant opportunity in anybody's career. And it was to be part of the startup team to launch his women's line and his jeans line for men's and women's. So that was pretty exceptional. And, forever grateful for that opportunity. It was a super big milestone. And from that point, it became more management related. So it was very process oriented. It was very time and action calendar oriented.
You've used that phrase a few times, time and action. What does that mean in the fashion business?
It means your production development calendar. The abbreviation is T&A, not to be confused with another T&A. But we always say a T&A is really, this is where the season starts, and this is where the production X factory starts, meaning when the goods leave the finishing point of origin, and they get picked up by the freight team, and then we're on to the the next season. Time and action calendar. It's about delivery, so backpedaling in, and so being under the gun for timing and approvals, because nothing ever goes right, as anybody who works in fashion knows. Sometimes you have deadlines and trigger dates for approvals, but the mill or the factory or the denim wash house misbehaved and didn't follow your instructions. And so as a result, you need another submission, but that submission conflicts with your trigger dates and commitment dates on your time and action calendar. So it's a big whirlwind of, okay, vendor, figure this out, or you're going to have a late delivery, which you're going to be responsible for airing, XYZ. So time and action calendar is a hard thing to sum up in, a 2-minute answer.
That's a good insight.
Yeah.
Yep.
But to answer your question about what after fabric, it really became this holistic process of really, project management, fabric and product development management, because I segued into denim and washing, and which is a whole other function, right? So anybody that goes to a store and buys a blouse, 9 out of 10 times, it's goods that's just cut from the roll of fabric. If you're walking into Polar, if you're walking into Rag & Bone, if you're walking into, any jeans line or the Gap, or you see that there's a wash. So that is a process. It involves development. It involves wash trials, laundry trials. So that kind of segued my role.
So that's what it means when you see the word wash?
Yes, wet processing. So a denim, every fabric comes off of the loom in its rigid, raw form. And most of the time, when it comes to sportswear or finished product, it requires a wet process, meaning it has to go through a wash cycle to soften it. So maybe there's a French terry sweatshirt that you buy, at Target, and it feels yummy. That probably had a rinse wash with a little bit of softener in it. But nothing comes off of the loom perfectly, finished. So that's why there's a whole other process that involves product development, because that involves shrinkage and shrinkage patterns. So, a lot of designers now are putting dry clean only on their labels because they know that the fabric has a very high shrinkage rate, and they're working with a factory that doesn't have laundry facilities. So they have a disclaimer. They basically say dry clean only to protect themselves. But the process involved in that is a high level, production development, technical design process whereby every style will have an after wash measurement spec, unlike silks or something that's really a dry clean only product. So did that answer your question about?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what were you doing in your next role that was broadening your experience?
My next role really moved into denim and wet processing, to be honest with you. So after my Tommy Jeans world, I actually was recruited over to DKNY Jeans and Active to fulfill that same kind of role, but more in a manager director level. And so that was very hands-on with, again, wash development, getting submits from the factory on the fabrics that we chose, because it's a two-pronged function. In some cases, it's three-pronged, because you need to not just see, you have to see wash panels, right? Double needle stitching or triple needle stitching or cross stitching or something to show how did the effect of the wash break down the fabric Is there a high color loss? Can you see contrast? Can you see a crosshatch in the construction? Is it a very slubby yarn? Because once you start to wash, color goes away, right?
Right.
Indigo is not color fast. It's a vegetable dye. So there's all of these iterations of finding the right fabric that would give the right effect. And not every fabric washes and performs the same way. What I tried to do when I was in that role was to bring forth the practice of my Tommy life, which was to build product efficiency, to build the collection where you got more bang for your buck, which is why his business was so successful, right? The jeans that started off, maybe there were 2 or 3 denim base cloths. That's it. You know, a basic jean, a wide, whatever the original jeans were. There was a carpenter. I mean, it was kind of before this whole jeans craze. It was before 7 jeans and all of that. And I brought the fact that when I went to DK, they were doing this denim with this mill, and I'm going to work with Japan with that. I'm going to work with Italy for that, and Spain, because I love this and I want to be all over the place. But there was something about being all over the place that you couldn't maintain brand consistency. And so what I tried to infuse into that system was this kind of maintained, not controlled, because that's a bad word, but this very streamlined, where possible, approach when you fabricate a collection. So that you could be more meaningful to a fabric mill and have a 5 to 10 to 25,000 yard order and get 3 washes out of that, versus having to do it with this mill and that mill and that mill, and to create your siblings that way instead of giving birth from one base cloth where you could have some twins, fraternal and identical. So it all goes down to the performance of each fabric and really identifying, how can I maximize utilization? Can this be used in other styles? Why do I need to run 2 different corduroys? Can I run one? In the terms of shirting, same thing.
It's so fascinating when you talk about it, because I've heard the word wash, for as long as I can remember. But I never thought of when they say, triple wash denim or this denim, but I do remember my horror when I got this pair of jeans that I just loved, and they had that really stiff
rigid
effect, and I wanted them to stay that way. I thought they were really cool. And the first time they came out of the wash, I'm like,
postage stamp.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They shrunk, they turned like this blurry blue. They no longer had the difference between the really dark blue and the white that you could see was made of black or blue and white stitches to make that really stiff fabric. It was all gone. It was all a blur of blue.
Well, did you follow the care instructions?
Probably not.
That's my point.
Because I'm sure they said dry clean, and I'm like, dry clean my jeans? Not a chance.
Or wash inside out, but lay flat to dry as well.
Oh, interesting.
To maintain color. Saturation, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, because I also just had a oil pair of jeans, a black oil jeans. Oh my gosh, big mistake. Put them in the washing machine, put them in the dryer. Okay. They're probably irrecognizable.
Probably wax finish, kind of coated. Yeah.
They don't even look like the same pants.
Yeah. I think the lesson in this story is that you need to read your care labels a little bit better. And that's honestly, that was also part of the process, because people... people are stupid. I'm sorry I said it, but there's liability when you don't say certain things to warn against certain things, and I always say this to my clients now, you really have to assume that the customer is dumb AF, and that they are going to want to pull a fast one on you, because, if you're an e-com business and they want to wear things and return it and say, so we do things to offset and to mitigate those, potential, mishaps.
Right.
So, and it all comes down to protecting the brand and making sure in clear writing, do not put these in the dryer or else. And now, even with the advent of denim, as you probably remember in the 90s, where they had those special hang tags, warning, do not sit on light surface. Right? Because so many people would get into this dark denim, rigid denim, selvage denim phase.
And you left your blue stain on your
white
couch.
BMW, right? Yep. And so it's, and again, people sue for that stuff. They are, they're hungry for
Wow.
litigation. So
you were at Donna Karan, and then what? Then what's happening after there?
So after that,
or during there?
After that, I went to work for a small designer called Cynthia Steffi, and that was an interesting experience. It was on 7th Avenue. The elevator of our building at 550 had all the famous names, Michael Kors, Jill Stewart, Isaac Mizrahi. You ride the elevator and you just are like, wow, what an amazing, to be in this company, what an experience every morning. And it was a small company. It had a sample room in the back. It was very small family run. I think they were very enamored with my big company background and my fabric assets. And so it was really a learning curve for me in how to adapt to a small company environment. And, again,
big shift.
Very
because
big.
a lot of people go from the small company to the big company.
Correct.
You went from the very big.
Very much.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I went from having a stocked refrigerator at the office with cranberry juice and Pepsi and Coke to having my paycheck bouncing.
Right.
So, But what I learned was immeasurable. And, I don't regret any of that because it really was my time to see where I could be a big fish in a small sea rather than a small fish in a big sea in my professional life, to see what that felt like. And from there, I'm trying to remember where I went from there. I did some consulting work. There were some celebrities that were looking to start their clothing lines that I'm not able to share here. But let's just say I had some fun experiences with some Grammy Award winning singer. And from there, I wound up being recruited back to my former colleagues that started this New York office license of a French parent company to launch all of these designer children's wear brands. So it was my polo jean. I left off polo jeans. I was head of fabric and wash development for men's and women's. So a bunch of my polo former colleagues and a bunch of my Tommy former colleagues joined forces, and it was all very incestuous. We all worked in the same places, and then they said, come back, let's launch this New York office of this big French company. And it was very much like setting up a new business. I was always intrigued by that. I always say one of the reasons why I started my own company was because of my entrepreneurial spirits and juices that were very much activated from that Tommy experience where I was selected to be part of that startup. And it really was, as I say, starting up a company at the time within I think it was a $350 million company at the time, was a pretty interesting opportunity to learn how to start a business, right? It's not every day that you get to sit at the table with some of the best leadership in the industry and to learn from them and to make mistakes and do it better and get it to market and scratch it and get on an airplane Saturday night of Thanksgiving weekend because Tommy wasn't happy with the first round of protos and we had to go put in a second round within 48 hours and bring them back to him. I mean, that doesn't happen in everyday normal fashion America, as far as I'm concerned. But that startup energy is really what invigorated me. And I took that to this children's wear license. It was called CWF, Children Worldwide Fashion. And it was a huge, huge French company that owned all of the designer children's wear licenses for like Timberland, DKNY Kids, Nike, Evisu, Burberry, you name it. And they opened up this New York office to bridge the opportunity into the US to take on more licenses. And so we did, I was there for about 2 years. And the Frenchies, as we called them, they flew in one day and kind of shut the operation down unannounced. And that was July of 2006. I had just gotten back from 2 weeks overseas, brought back suitcases of salesman samples and wash trials for all of the DKNY kids, Denim and juniors, and they shut the company down. And
oh my gosh.
That was when I said, okay.
Time to start something of my own.
Time to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So now we're up to fabric to finish. Explain to everyone listening What is Fabric to Finish? What does it mean to you, and what do you offer?
Wow, what does it mean to me? It means a lot of wrinkles and sleepless nights. So I'll start there.
That's a very honest, direct answer.
Listen, embarking on that journey was a whimsical thing that I did because one of my, best friends and mentors in life, basically when I was going over to the fabric shows in the fall of 2006, she said just casually, "Oh, so you're starting your own business, right?" And I said, okay, I guess I am. So there wasn't a grand plan. The grand plan for me was the aha moment when I realized when large corporate America was not responsive to my outreach after I left the children's wear world. And I said, wow, that's interesting. I have all the skill set. I just came out of starting, I know how to start from scratch. Our sourcing abilities are incredible. I know I could lend an opportunity to denim and washing to some companies that it's not their core competency, right? So it's like a Talbot's or, Chico's or something where, they're not known for their denim. They have expertise in other areas of the market. And I said, you know what? I'm going to bring a solution because back in the day, there were no fractional anything. Fractional is a buzzword now.
Right.
Back in the day, we had outsourced graphic designers for t-shirt programs, right? Because it was a seasonal business. So we didn't have a graphic designer on staff at any of, the Polo, the Tommy, the DK, Sean John, that we had an art director because most of his business was graphic. But to continue the thought, what I realized when they weren't interested in my proposition of let me support you and help in this part of your business, i.e. denim and washing, I said, okay, they don't need me, right? And I really, I'm emotional. I need to feel needed. And I realized that there's a whole market that nobody was tapping into. And it was the independent and emerging designer market. And that's when I realized that's where I needed to shift because my first client out of the box was, it was Diane von Furstenberg, but not her brand. It was her creative director at the time, Nathan Jendon, an incredibly talented, brilliant designer that she was supporting his own namesake ready-to-wear collection. And they needed somebody to manage it. And they couldn't infiltrate the internal DVF system because they had all their parts in place. It was a very successful operation. And I wound up signing Nathan as my first client. And so again, independent and emerging, he's well named in the industry, worked as creative director for one of the biggest recognizable global brands, but didn't have infrastructure to help pull it together. And so that was where it all started. And, setting up the design studio, making sure that everything was contained within the boundaries of what finances I was told to maintain based on the accounting department. Because, creatives don't look at price tags. They don't look at price per yard or price per meter. And if fabric out of Italy for a tailored suiting collection is 47 to 57 euros a meter, you can do the math on how much that might cost per piece based on an ultimate consumption or yielding exercise. But I literally was able to kind of build out his business model and oversee the operations, get him to London Fashion Week, arrange everything, all the sales appointments, at the Crillon Hotel in Paris and Net-a-Porter and all of that stuff. It was very all-encompassing. It was extremely rewarding and exhausting and overwhelming, but it was absolutely what I signed up for as it related to targeting those independent and emerging brands. And so while it started off as an exclusive relationship, once the market crashed and the that whole housing boom thing happened, Diane pulled the plug. They kind of turned off the faucet, closed the collection, and I wound up building the multifaceted, multi-brand consulting agency that I originally had envisioned. So brands that were looking for stability, a full turnkey solution back office, people that had ideas but weren't technically educated. They didn't have a design background. They didn't know how to spec a garment. They didn't understand fabric construction or drape or wash if it were going to be a processed program. And so they leaned into fabric to finish as their source of opportunity for the full service under one roof. And that's what we became, and that's what we still are.
Now, when you say full service under one roof, so you explain how the process works. Somebody finds you somehow. How do most people find you? Word of mouth?
We drop leaflets from Airbnb. No, I'm just kidding. Google, actually. We were on the Makers Row platform for a considerable amount of time, but now it's primarily word of mouth and the Google. You know, whenever I meet a potential prospective, you know, when we have our first initial phone call, I'm like, how did we meet? Was it, they said Google. I said, I love that matchmaker. She's good. You know, so.
And what are the phrases they're searching to find you?
Fashion consultant, fabric sourcing, production management, production manager, you know, fashion one-stop shop, those kind of things. And so I think, generally speaking, what we have found is, and I talk a lot about this on our weekly, you know, vlog series that we put to our socials. I talk about the fact that, you know, fashion is not IKEA. And I'm very much simplifying it by saying that, because I think the outside world, as you know, if I revert back to the beginning of our conversation where I was forbidden to go to fashion school, I was forbidden because, you know, I think that, you know, the lack of understanding about the industry and the, you know, this concept that it's just a dumb thing and, you know, you're not going to make anything out of yourself. But frankly speaking, I think the outside world in the entrepreneurial space think similarly. Oh, I can do this myself. I don't have to pay anybody to help design my collection. And this is well before AI and 3D design programming. And so what we realized was that a lot of people that came through our doors to meet us and to interview us for opportunities to work together were under an interesting impression that there wasn't really much involved.
You know, I could believe that wholeheartedly, because I think most people would not do pretty much anything they do in life if they actually understood how much work is underneath that surface, that they have no idea. You know, people go into businesses and they, you know, or they start a job and they think, you know, oh, I want to be president, Jamie. That's what my goal is with this interview. I want your job.
Right.
You know, but they don't understand the 20, 30 years you put into...
Well, all the steps involved. Again, I think people simplify it because in this world of TikTok and Instagram, everything is a 2-minute video.
Yeah.
And it's like poof, you know, you can stand up, change your outfit, hit the button and show, you know, your morning outfit and your nighttime outfit. But, you know, she had to get her hair and makeup done. She had to have a fitting for those pants. Like, you know, she had to put her baby down for the nap. Like, there's so much more to this process.
Just the idea if somebody said, well, I want to be a T-shirt manufacturer, you know, well, whose label's going to be on that? You know, are you going to put sizing stickers on it? What's the packaging that's going to go on it? What's the fabric going to be? Is it going to be shrink wrapped when you're done? I mean, it's unbelievable the levels.
Exactly, because factories are, you know, as I say, I jokingly call them real estate agents because they're really just looking to sell their under the needle, right? So they have a business
under the needle,
meaning they have sewers, they have employees, and they have to keep filling the sewing line. Period. End of story. So what they're there to grow their relationship, but really what they need to do is keep feeding their workers. So they're not there to mince words. They're not there to do all the dirty work, right? I think a lot of these newcomers think that, oh, you know, if once my uncle's dog walker's nephew's brother introduced me to a factory in China, I'm set.
golden.
I don't need you. And, the truth is hard
Oh, yeah.
because they're up for a rude awakening with really what's coming down the pipeline. Because there is a process involved.
Yeah.
Factories don't want to mess around with things that are not going to be revenue building, unless, again, when I would walk off the airplane in India, there would be like a red carpet at the fabric mill appointments because I was the buyer for the Tommy Hilfiger fabric department. I wasn't,
A tiny brand.
Right. And so their eyes lit up. They received you differently. You were definitely, they were hungry to impress you and to earn your business. And that's what relationships are all about. My point in mentioning that now is these small startup brands that don't have a Lulu logo, that don't have a Nike swoosh that is an identifiable Ralph Lauren polo pony, they have to prove themselves.
Yes.
And not only do they have to prove themselves to the market, eventually when they hit the market, whenever that is, 11, 12 months later after a full, cycle, but they really have to prove it to the supply chain because they're looking for not one-hit wonders. They're not looking for kind of flailing arms and, careless activity because it's decision. Sign off on this strike off. Where's my fabric approval? I can't start cutting until I have fabric. I can't have fabric until I issue an order for fabric. I can't order the fabric until you sign off on the fabric. And then we do color development and lab dipping and print development and testing. And then the lead times to get to sewing is, 30, 60, 90 days sometimes, depending on what fabric you choose.
Right.
So the garment maker is a piece of the pie. So, I always smile and let people, tell me what they've accomplished because they found someone on Alibaba and they're, they don't know who they're talking to. They don't know how many children and underage workers are on the other side of the computer. They don't know if their money is going to be taken and nothing is going to be shipped in return. And also, the catastrophe of, having a box show up or 25 to 40, 50, 100 boxes of a first order that hadn't been QC inspected, that was out of spec. And that you have a pant that came in that was, the left leg was shorter than the right leg. Generally speaking, these entrepreneurs are very hungry. They come from different industries, marketing, sales, digital media, doctors, lawyers. In fact, we actually launched, we launched a really cool swimwear line, and sun protective swimwear line that was thought of by a board certified dermatologist, a lovely woman, lovely woman who really wanted to put her money where her mouth is because of the amount of melanoma that she's treating, but she's a fashionable professional and said there's nothing out there in sun protective wear that is fashion forward, and I'm going to create that. So she came to us, didn't have knowledge of functionality because that's what we're there for,
right.
And we collaborated to, the maximum level that we could. And, along the way, having to explain to these individuals, she's a great example of where she knew what she didn't know. And that is a key thing for us.
That's a huge plus working with anyone.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So, where are we now, you asked? I realized that the needs of the market have shifted. So when people over the past, 19 years worked with us and engaged us, we realized through trials and tribulations that they were in some cases ill-prepared for the journey, not just from an informational and technical standpoint, right? Nobody can source fabric like I can, right? They might have a great idea, but I can tell you in, minutes what we should fabricate in. And then I have my team assembled for the rest, the sketching, the design, the CADs, the details, all the amazing trim developments. But as it relates to the missing functions, what we found during some of our engagements, the buyers, for example, would be very much committed to rushing to market. I got to get this to market before someone else copies this. I have this unique idea and I don't want anybody else to rip me off or knock me off. And I would say very clearly, I understand that you don't want such and such, global brand to find out about you and copy your technology. But I would probably recommend that you save your shekels starting with us and apply for a designer utility patent so that you can start protecting yourself and focus on IP and not just rush, because once it's in the market, it's fair game. Just because you got there first doesn't make you, the greatest inventor since electricity. So, that's one example where we have to offset and set the expectations of the brands, because I don't have a crystal ball. Okay. I'm not there to run their business. I'm there to be a business advisor, project manager, fashion executive, to help bring all the pieces of the pie together. And there's many pieces that are not accounted for in a lot of our engagements. So we have to fill them in throughout the journey. In some cases, brands were not committed to their logo or their word mark. So we're developing a collection. Factories, like I told you, Tempus Fugit, like where, I don't want to just mess around. So I can't do full development and full costing until I actually have the full pieces. What's your logo? Again, what's your polo pony? Where is it going? Is it embroidery? Is it a heat seal? Is it a 3D thermo welded application that I have to do lab testing for adhesion on cotton versus synthetic versus high texture, low pile, high pile? So what we realized was that a lot of the brands that we were shipping for were not committed to all of, I think, the necessary facets of business setup before you launch to market. I learned that we shipped a women's knit suit line that executed so beautifully. I wear mine very proudly, but they didn't have their website ready. So they, in the 8 to 9 to 10 to 12, 13 months that we're working on these brands, while we're in our kitchen whipping up these taste tests and to go through the fit development, the product development, the cost engineering, the fit engineering, they should be working on the build out. What's the distribution? So we now have logo and brand, my art director designs and develops for the brands that don't have their footing, their brand identity. So we start with the identity. So what is the swoosh, or what is the, you understand? We also do web development, photo shoot, as I believe building out the e-com platforms and the Shopify. And it's a smaller scale than what they would be forced to invest in outside at some of these very big agencies where you get lost in the shuffle. And so how we've packaged it is that there's one team that's overseeing this message. It's consistent, it's clear, it's on brand, it makes sense. Anybody that looks at a digital presentation will understand that that's the brand when they look at the actual physical product, the logos, the branding, the hang tags, the packaging, the mood, the feeling. And all of it is synergized, where it's one set of eyes or one team set of eyes, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to do this with this company because, again, my uncle's nephew's college roommate's grandmom knows this person in Norway, and they have a cheap, price on such and such. And so we try our best to say, do you work a la carte, just, hand this over. Sometimes problems happen because, their logo and branding is maybe too big to fit on the undercollar of a PK polo. If we had been the ones in charge of it, we would have been able to size it and scale it, and our creative director would know where those would be placed so that my art director could generate the artwork in accordance and compliant with the rest of the product, which is a seamless way to do things. It's a great way to save on time and cost, as opposed to, a lot of them outsourcing another outsource.
When we're getting really tight on time, which I can't believe this went through so fast, but I'm curious, when someone comes to you, is it like a one-off product, or are they imagining a full line with seasons?
Great question. In this day and age of entrepreneurship, anything goes. You see one style product classifications, like the perfect t-shirt, right? The perfect pull-on loungewear short for men. The perfect socks that won't fall off a newborn baby, infant, or toddler because it has a technology that we developed and built inside, the edge. It's at this day and age where people are launching. Remember, if they're going into the digital space, nobody knows them, right? And so we oftentimes say less is more. The hero capsule collection is probably the best place for people to start, be it a girl's tailored suit that is, a 3-piece collection, or a golf line that's a 6 to 8 to 10-piece collection or pickleball, what have you, because people want to log on and see impact. They want to see a collection. So it's either one style with multiple colorways and being, this is my everything. This is my go-to. Buy my t-shirt. It's the best. You won't be disappointed. And I don't need to outfit it with anything else because all I care about is getting this t-shirt to market. And that's my messaging, versus the other brands that are, I'm going to start off with a t-shirt and a pant and a blazer so that I can give the look to my guy, whoever my guy is, and have a PK polo, a t-shirt, and a sweatshirt. Let me acquire these customers. Let my Google acquisition and my ad work do the work. Then, based on sales, I'll add a chino pant the next season, or I'll add a blazer, or I'll add a legging to another collection that only had a short under a dress. So it's very, I think, intelligent to have these micro collections, because what everybody is doing is kind of just trying to gain access. And what are you good at, right? I'm not going to be everything to everybody in this collection. I'm not ready to be everything. I'm not the Veronica Beard yet. I'm saying in terms of what my entrepreneurial mind is thinking in terms of how these startups. But you know what? I would love a killer blazer. So we're going to do a killer blazer, and I'm going to be known as a blazer brand. And then once the girls can't get enough of it, I need to add on because now I have access. I'm in their head. I'm connected to them. I have a direct line to them where I can say, here's my blazer. It's in cotton twill, or it's in this beautiful wool linen that has a little bit of stretch and it fits you beautifully. And in the case of the Veronicas, they started off with that blazer concept and that beautiful dickie, and then they built on. And so I think that is a really intelligent way that these brands should be considering launching, because the out-of-pocket financial commitment is huge any other way. So with a collection of 1 to 7 is uniquely different, and you can do the math on what it looks like, 20 to 30 styles times X number of units at production, what that would look like. So
well, I wish we were not out of time, but we are out of time. I have been speaking with Jamie Koff. She's the founder of Fabric to Finish. I sure learned a lot during this episode. There's going to be all kinds of contact information below so you can get in touch with her if you have a design or an idea you want to explore and a budget. And she'll talk about that to you when she speaks with you. But really, Jamie, thank you so much. This was so informative.
It was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I enjoyed it tremendously. I can't believe how quick the time went. Thank you, everybody. I'm Dian Griesel. This has been the Silver Disobedience Perception Dynamics podcast. We're recording in beautiful Manhattan Center on West 34th Street in New York City. Please hit subscribe. Follow Jamie so you can pay attention to all the great things she's doing. And please do share this episode after you subscribe. Thanks. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.